"You're weak, Dad. You have nothing left to teach me." Those words weren't whispered in private. They were thrown out loud in front of dozens of people, like a sentence being passed. The entire room froze, and in that instant, something inside me burned. Shame and rage. Before I continue, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because every time you engage, you prove that no one, absolutely no one, has the right to strip away the dignity of someone who built everything with their own hands. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. The background music kept playing, but it sounded muffled, distant, like it came from another world. My heart pounded in my ears, and every beat reminded me of the cruel truth. My own son had just called me weak. It wasn't just a careless remark. It was a judgment, and worse, a judgment passed in front of strangers. Ryan stood there with a glass of wine in his hand, his jacket perfectly pressed, silk tie in place, and a cold smile on his face. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew his words weren't just aimed at me, but at everyone in that room. I noticed some guests exchanging uneasy glances, unsure whether to look away or pretend they hadn't heard. One man cleared his throat awkwardly. Emily, his wife, placed her hand on Ryan's arm and gave a side smile, satisfied, like my humiliation was her trophy. My hands trembled on the polished wooden table. The golden chandeliers reflected off the champagne glasses, and the sparkle mocked me. My chest burned. My face felt like fire, every stare searing into my skin. I wanted to answer back. I wanted to stand and shout, but I didn't, because something inside me whispered, "Wait." And in that heavy silence, a memory struck me. I had spent my whole life building things. Houses, buildings, structures that stood strong even against time. I was not weak. I had never been weak. But in that room, surrounded by wealth and appearances, no one remembered that. That's when I realized the humiliation of those words wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something greater. Ryan raised his glass to toast with friends, pretending nothing had happened. I stayed quiet, but inside, something had shifted. The weight of shame was transforming into something else. Not hatred, not despair, but determination. I knew that sooner or later he would find out the truth, that the man he called weak still had far more power than he imagined, that no matter how much he tried to erase me, I still held his future in my hands. That thought made me breathe deeper, and for the first time that night, fear gave way to a strange sense of calm. His words still echoed in the hall, but inside me, the promise of a turning point was already taking shape. The party looked perfect. It was the kind of night Emily dreamed of showing off. A spacious home, flawless decor, candles glowing against the glass, the smell of expensive flowers filling the air. Laughter bounced off the walls, mixed with the clinking of glasses. But to me, every detail was just a reminder. This world wasn't mine anymore. I was in my son's house, but I didn't belong to it. The white walls, the modern art, the imported furniture, none of it carried the essence of what I had built with my own hands. It was just a stage set up to impress. Ryan moved among the guests like a politician on campaign. The tailored suit fit him perfectly. His smile, practiced, never left his face. With every handshake, every self-congratulatory story, he made sure to emphasize that he had built everything on his own. Emily was no different. Her blue dress sparkled under the golden lights. Her gestures were elegant, her eyes always scanning to see who was watching. She spoke loudly about trips to Europe, luxury brands, investments, and every so often, she slipped in little digs, comparing her daughter's sophisticated gift with my simple gesture. I stayed quiet, sitting in the corner of the living room. Each sip of wine left a bitter taste of contempt in my throat. I never needed luxury. I never cared for it. But that night, I understood. That's all that mattered to them. My granddaughter ran through the room, laughing. She was the only genuine light in that place. When she opened the gift I had given her, a small golden key, a replica of the first house I built, her eyes sparkled. But the moment Emily stepped in, that sparkle faded. "Oh, sweetheart, put that away. Later you'll open your real present." Her voice was sweet, but dripping with venom, as if my gesture was nothing more than a disposable memory. The main guests were lawyers, investors, Ryan's colleagues, men in suits, women in long dresses. They talked about careers, promotions, who had just bought a bigger house. It was a universe I didn't belong to, and deep down, I knew they saw me as nothing more than an old relic. Some stopped by out of courtesy, asked how I was doing, but after a brief answer, their eyes drifted back to Ryan, as if I were just the shadow of the host. And maybe that's exactly how he wanted me to be seen. Watching him, a memory hit me like a punch. I saw myself young again, covered in dust, laying bricks under the scorching Texas sun. I saw myself sweating in silence, believing I was building not just houses, but a future that would carry my family forward. It was that work that sent Ryan to the best schools. That sacrifice paid for his law degree. But now, he erased that part of the story. He told everyone his success was born solely from his own brilliance, and that hurt. The music kept playing, soft jazz, chosen to give the night sophistication, but every note felt fake, every smile rehearsed, every conversation just another scene in a play where I was the forgotten extra. I could feel the looks, some curious, others pitying, as if they thought, the old man doesn't belong here anymore. But they were wrong, very wrong, because despite the silence, I knew something no one else in that room suspected. And that knowledge kept me standing, even when shame tried to knock me down. Ryan could flaunt, Emily could show off, the guests could treat me like I was invisible. But there were still documents, contracts, assets, in my name. There was still a truth hidden behind all that glitter and pretense, and sooner or later, they would all find out. That night, as I watched my son smile at everyone else and ignore me, I felt the first spark of a turning point ignite inside me. It wasn't just revenge I wanted. It was a necessity, the need to prove that I was still here, and that no matter how much they tried to erase me, I remained the root of it all. The hall sparkled brighter than ever, but deep down I already knew. Soon those lights would fade. I wasn't born among crystal glasses or under golden chandeliers. My world began in the suffocating heat of construction sites, with the smell of wet cement and calloused hands gripping worn-out tools. While other young men dreamed of college degrees, my dream was simpler. Raise a wall, finish a house, leave a safe roof over someone's head. That's how I grew. That's how I learned. One brick at a time. I still remember my first big job back in the 80s. The sun seemed to set the asphalt on fire, and at just over 20 years old, I spent whole days pushing wheelbarrows of sand, hauling heavy blocks, sleeping on makeshift mattresses at the site. There was no glamour, but there was dignity. I knew I was planting something, and over time that seed grew. I started leading crews, learning the value of planning, of calculating every detail before laying my hands on the work. It wasn't long before I founded my own construction company. Nothing flashy, nothing huge, just solid and reliable. Decades of quiet work followed. While many bragged, I just built homes, schools, small office buildings. If you walked through Houston, you'd see my mark spread across entire streets. There was no sign, with my face on it, but inside the walls I raised, lives were unfolding. That's what drove me. Knowing a family was safe, a child had a secure bedroom, a business could grow inside a space I had helped raise. That was my pride, and it was this work that supported Ryan. Every contract signed with sweat paid for his private school tuition. Every sleepless night gave him a youth free of hardship. Every callus on my hands paved his way into one of the best law schools in the country. But time has a cruel way of distorting memory. As Ryan grew up, he began to see comfort as something natural, as if it had appeared out of nowhere. In his mind, it was obvious he'd always have the best. The effort behind it all vanished from his sight. I still remember when he came back from college after his first year. He looked at me, covered in dust after a hard day's work, and said, "One day I'll have a different life, Dad. I don't want to smell like cement for the rest of my life." It hurt to hear, but I said nothing. I thought it was just youthful arrogance, a desire to fly higher. I never imagined that over time that sentence would become the lens through which he saw me forever. Emily only reinforced it. From the moment she entered his life, she made sure to feed the idea that I was a man of the past. I saw it in her eyes, that look that measures a person's worth by the clothes they wear, the car they drive, the brand on their watch. And me, with my calloused hands and simple ways, I never passed her test. At first, I tried to ignore it, but it didn't take long to realize that Ryan was absorbing every word. Each time she gave a disdainful smile when hearing my stories, he seemed to believe a little more that my time had expired. But there was a difference between what they thought and what I knew. They only saw the lines on my face, the worn clothes I chose over expensive suits. But inside me, I carried a history of strength. I carried proof that couldn't be erased. Deeds, contracts, land still in my name, quiet investments that supported much of the lifestyle they flaunted. And despite them calling me weak, the truth was, I had built an empire that still stood. They just couldn't see it. Or maybe they chose not to. I remember one afternoon when Ryan visited me at the old construction office. The place was simple, walls marked by time, the smell of wood soaked into the furniture. He walked in, looked around and said, "You should sell this. Nobody values this kind of thing anymore." I didn't reply, but inside it felt like every wall in that office had heard the insult. Those walls knew. They had seen the sleepless nights, the scribbled papers, the bills paid at the limit, and I knew too. Deep down, Ryan always wanted to erase the memory of what I built. He wanted the world to believe he made himself, that his success was independent of my story. And maybe that was the greatest injustice of all. Because the truth is, he was walking on a foundation I had laid, and no building, no future, exists without a foundation. Now sitting at that party, watching him parade in his expensive suit, I realized that past hadn't disappeared. It was there, pulsing in silence, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be just a memory. It would be living proof that the man called weak was still the pillar of it all. The turning point didn't come all at once. It was subtle, calculated, as if Ryan had rehearsed the scene to strike me where it hurt most. It happened during the party, when it was time to hand out presents for my granddaughter. The room was full. Guests sat on plush chairs, others stood with champagne flutes in their hands, laughing at jokes that only made sense in that shallow world of appearances. Children ran between the adults, ripping through colorful wrapping paper, while hired photographers captured every detail of the night. When my turn came, I called my granddaughter with affection. She ran over, her blonde hair bouncing, her bright dress glittering under the golden chandeliers. I handed her a small blue velvet box. She opened it carefully, and inside she found a delicate golden key, engraved with care. It was a miniature replica of the first house I had ever built, a symbol, a piece of my history, given to her as a promise that even when I was gone, her roots would never be lost. Her eyes lit up. "Grandpa, it's beautiful," she said, with a genuine smile that filled my chest with pride. But that sparkle didn't last. Emily stepped closer, her strong perfume filling the air, and leaned in to see the gift. She forced a smile, the kind that hides more poison than kindness. And with a sweet voice loud enough for everyone to hear, she said, "Put that away, sweetheart. Later you'll open your real present." The real present stood behind her, an imported bicycle, outrageously expensive, wrapped in golden ribbons. The guests clapped when they saw it, as if it were the highlight of the night. My granddaughter ran to the bike, forgetting the little key in her hand. That key fell to the ground, rolling until it stopped under the coffee table. A knot tightened in my throat. It was as if my story had been kicked under the rug in front of everyone. But Ryan didn't stop there. As I bent down to pick up the fallen key, he raised his voice, loud enough to silence the hall. "Dad, these things you bring, they belong to the past. My daughter will learn to live in the future, a real future, not tied to cheap memories." The clinking of silverware stopped. One of the guests coughed, embarrassed. Another bit his lip, too ashamed to look at me. Emily crossed her arms and smiled, satisfied with the spectacle. I froze. The cold metal of the key trembled in my hand along with my fingers. The word cheap echoed in my head, not because of the object itself, but because of the contempt behind it. It wasn't about the gift. It was about me. For a moment, I thought. About answering. The words sat on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to remind him of every sleepless night, every brick I laid, every bill paid at the expense of my health. I wanted to shout, "Without my past, you wouldn't have any future at all." But I held back, not because I agreed with him, but because, deep down, I knew it still wasn't the right time. The stares around me weighed heavy, some filled with pity, others with judgment, and to many in that room, in that instant, I was nothing more than the outdated old man who insisted on offering symbols in a world obsessed with display. My granddaughter came running back, distracted now with her new bicycle. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, but her eyes were already elsewhere, captivated by the bigger, shinier, louder gift. The key I had given her ended up forgotten in Emily's purse, as if it had no value at all. That's when I felt the deepest pain, not for myself, but for realizing that Ryan wanted to strip away even the memory of what I had built. He wanted his daughter to grow up never knowing the strength that held that roof above her head. The minutes that followed were silent torture. Ryan kept chatting with his friends, laughing, bragging about his new projects. But from time to time, I caught his sideways glance, heavy with triumph. He wanted me to feel the blow. and he thought he had won. But while the bitterness of humiliation burned inside me, a flame began to spark. It wasn't blind rage. It was something colder, more calculated. I knew that moment couldn't go unanswered. I couldn't allow history to be rewritten right before my eyes, as if my past were nothing but dust. I looked again at the golden key, clutched it tightly in my pocket, and in that small piece of metal, I didn't see something forgotten. I saw a reminder, a promise. Ryan might think he had silenced my voice. He might believe humiliation would shut me down, but he had no idea what I still held. And for the first time that night, I realized the conflict wasn't just beginning. It had just become inevitable. After that night, nothing was the same. Ryan's words, Emily's contempt, they stuck to me like a stain that wouldn't wash out. But instead of fading, the feeling grew. Not in open explosions, but in small daily wounds, invisible to others, and cutting me deep. Family gatherings, once a source of joy, turned into stages for my humiliation. Every time I arrived, Ryan made sure to put me in a smaller place. Sometimes it was a disguised joke, other times an innocent comment, but always laced with venom. "Dad, don't worry about contracts. You wouldn't understand anyway. Nobody does things the way you used to anymore. The world moved on, and some people stayed behind." The words came with a polite smile, as if they were harmless jokes, but I felt the awkward stares of the guests, the discomfort of those listening, and the worst part, many silently agreed. Emily played her role masterfully. She never had to be openly harsh. A look was enough, a muffled laugh, a comment to her friends about how Michael is still stuck in a past that doesn't exist anymore. I heard it. I always heard it. At Christmas dinner, she made sure to place my gift at the bottom of the tree, hidden behind the others. When my granddaughter finally opened it, an old book I had kept since my youth, filled with personal notes, dreams, and goals, Emily sighed dramatically. "Interesting, but do you think a child can really understand the value of that?" Some laughed. I swallowed hard. The small injustices never stopped. Family decisions were made by everyone except me. Which school my granddaughter would attend, where they would go on vacation. Even the menu for a dinner held in my honor was decided without me. And when I tried to give my opinion, Ryan would cut me off with that infuriating calmness. "Dad, let us handle this. You've already done enough. It's time for you to rest now." Rest. That word sounded like a grave. As if I had been buried alive, reduced to someone who existed only to watch from the sidelines. But there were moments when the pain cut deeper. One afternoon I stopped by Ryan's office unannounced. I only wanted to leave an envelope with documents for properties still in my name. I walked in and found him laughing with two colleagues. One of them asked about me, and Ryan replied, "My father. He doesn't understand anything I do. He just tells stories about hauling bricks. I'm the one building the future now." They all laughed. I said nothing. I left the envelope on his desk and walked out in silence. But that laugh echoed in my mind for weeks. Even in the simplest things, I was diminished. Whenever I invited the family over for dinner at my house, there was always an excuse. Too much work, unmissable commitments, trips already planned. But when someone important invited them, they dropped everything to go. My house, the place that had once been the center of every celebration, became forgotten. The garden I had planted with my own hands, the walls I had painted myself, none of it mattered anymore. It was as if my story was being erased, day by day, piece by piece. The hardest part of all was the look in my granddaughter's eyes. I knew she still loved me, but slowly, I began to see Ryan and Emily shaping her view. She started repeating phrases like, "Mom said you're from the old days. Dad said you don't know how to use a computer." Innocent words from a child, but sharper than any direct insult. They were rewriting my image in front of her eyes, and that I could not allow. With every humiliation, I stayed silent, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew an outburst would only make me look like the bitter old man who couldn't accept the new generation. So I swallowed the pain, I swallowed the silence, and I stored it all inside me. The weight grew heavier, and with it, the certainty that the turning point was coming. The strange thing is, in the middle of all that, I began to notice different looks. Some guests, distant relatives, even old colleagues from the company, witnessed those scenes of contempt. They said nothing, but their eyes spoke for them. This isn't right. And in a way, that silent witness fueled me. It was as if there were invisible recorders, keeping track of every detail. They laughed at me. They underestimated me, but they had no idea. I was just waiting for the right moment. I endured everything in silence. And that silence, unlike what they thought, wasn't weakness. It was preparation. Each small injustice was a stone thrown at me. But together, they were building something, a new foundation, one that, when the time came, would support the turning point no one saw coming. By then I already knew. It's not about shouting to be heard. It's about waiting until the whole world can no longer ignore your voice. The silence I kept wasn't empty. It was strategy. Every word I chose not to say, every answer I swallowed was like a move on an invisible chessboard Ryan and Emily couldn't see. They thought they had beaten me, that they had pushed me aside, reduced me to an old man clinging to memories. But while they underestimated me, I worked in silence. I began revisiting old documents. In the office of my house, the same one Ryan called outdated, I opened forgotten drawers, brushed dust off yellowed folders, reread contracts I had kept for decades. There they were, deeds, stocks, land, assets that, in their eyes, no longer existed, but in practice, still supported much of the luxury they flaunted. Calmly, I started organizing everything, sorting papers, making copies, consulting trusted lawyers, some of them old friends, men who still respected me, who remembered when my name stood behind the construction company. With each meeting, I felt my position grow stronger. It wasn't nostalgia, it was proof. Meanwhile, within the family circle, I kept using silence as armor. I let Ryan give his victory speeches, let Emily parade her superiority in expensive dresses. I smiled faintly, as if it didn't matter. But inside, every offensive comment was noted, stored in my memory as fuel for the right moment. I observed them, studied their gestures, their words, their vanity, and I understood that sooner or later, their arrogance would be the opening I needed. There were days when the temptation to react immediately was strong. On Emily's birthday, for example, Ryan raised a glass and thanked my wife, who teaches me every day never to settle for less. Unlike certain people who are content living in mediocrity, I sat just a few feet away. I heard it all, and I stayed silent. People looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I simply lifted my glass, as if I were just another guest. And in that gesture of apparent submission, the greatest strength was hidden: patience. At the same time, I began visiting some of the old projects. I walked through neighborhoods where I had built sturdy houses, where entire families still lived inside walls my hands had raised. Some residents still recognized me. "Aren't you Michael, the one who built this whole street? I remember you coming here every day." Those memories kept me going. They reminded me my story wasn't erased. It was only asleep, waiting to be told again. And I knew that when I told it, no one could deny it. I also began gathering more recent evidence, profit reports from the company, dividends that still hit my account. Ryan, despite being a brilliant lawyer, still depended on the results of the company I founded. He could strut around as if he were independent, but the truth was in the numbers, and the numbers still bore my name. It was almost ironic. While he called me weak, the money that paid for his daughter's school came from contracts I had signed years ago, and one day, everyone would know it. My granddaughter, without knowing, gave me even more strength. Once, when I took her to the park, she asked why I always carried papers in a folder. I smiled and answered, "They're pieces of our history, sweetheart. One day you'll understand they're worth more than any shiny gift." She didn't understand, but she smiled back. And in that smile, I found my reason to keep going. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about making it clear to her, and to everyone, that dignity cannot be bought or erased. Ryan and Emily never noticed my preparation. To them, I was just the silent old man, sitting in the corner of parties, holding a glass of wine without joining the conversation. They had no idea that while they laughed at me, I was setting the stage for the day that would silence them. I wasn't planning to humiliate them in secret. No, if it happened, it would be in front of everyone, on the very stage where they had tried to ridicule me, under the same golden lights they thought they controlled. And so, night after night, I stored every detail, organizing evidence, strengthening alliances, waiting for the perfect occasion. Not rushing, but with the patience of someone building a skyscraper. Solid foundation first, then the walls, and only at the end, the finish. My turning point was being built the same way, brick by brick, silence by silence, until one day, the whole structure would stand tall before everyone's eyes. And when that day came, Ryan would finally learn a lesson he never found in his law books. Never call weak the man who built the foundation of your life. The moment came at a business dinner Ryan hosted at his home. He wanted to impress. The marble table was set with lined-up glasses, fine china, and silver cutlery. Important guests were present, colleagues from his firm, investors, and some family members. It was the perfect stage for him to showcase his rise. I had been invited almost out of obligation, an accessory he could display, like pointing at an old picture on the wall, and I accepted, because I knew that night would be different. During dinner, Ryan stood up with his glass in hand, his voice steady, and began talking about his career, his achievements, how he had built his own success. The guests applauded. Emily smiled with pride, and in every sentence he repeated the same story, that of the man who made himself. I listened in silence, but inside me, the flame grew. With every word, the injustice became harder to bear, until in the middle of his speech he said, "Everything we have today is the result of my hard work and the vision I always had for the future." And then he looked straight at me. There was no doubt. The provocation was meant for me. I slowly set my glass on the table. The sharp sound of glass on marble cut through the silence. Everyone turned, maybe expecting me to stand just to congratulate my son. But that's not what I did. I rose calmly, adjusted the simple jacket I wore, and with a steady voice said, "Funny to hear that, son, because without this contract, your so-called bright future is nothing but a house of cards." A murmur swept the room. The conversation stopped. Emily's eyes widened in shock. Ryan laughed nervously, trying to cover the tension. "Dad, there's no need to embarrass anyone with old stories." But I wasn't telling stories. From the bag I had brought with me, I pulled out a leather folder. I placed it on the table. The thud echoed among the plates and silverware. Slowly, I opened it, revealing deeds, stocks, contracts still in my name, documents that proved much of the wealth supporting that life of luxury was still under my control. The guests leaned forward to look. Some widened their eyes. Others exchanged shocked glances. Emily went pale, not knowing where to look, and Ryan lost his smile. The silence was absolute. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock in the distance. I stepped closer to Ryan, looked him straight in the eye, and with a firm voice continued, "You called me weak. You said I had nothing left to teach. Well, let me remind you, this so-called weak man still holds the keys to the future you brag about so much." The room seemed to hold its breath. One of the investors cleared his throat uncomfortably. An aunt covered her mouth in shock, and my granddaughter, innocent, just looked at me as if she sensed something much greater was unfolding. Ryan tried to respond, but no words came. Right there, in front of everyone, the mask fell. He was no longer the confident lawyer, the proud host. He was just a man, exposed, dependent on the very father he had tried to belittle. And I realized the turning point had only just begun. The hall was silent, a silence heavier than any scream. All eyes were on me and Ryan. The open folder on the table looked like an improvised courtroom, and every document was evidence against his arrogance. Ryan tried to speak, but his voice broke. His hand squeezed the wine glass so tightly it nearly shattered. Emily nudged him discreetly, urging him to react, but he stayed, silent, swallowing shame in front of everyone. I, on the other hand, felt something different. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was dignity, returning to the place it never should have left. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped forward. I looked at Ryan, but spoke loud enough for every guest to hear. "You can call me weak, but never forget, it was this weak man who built the very ground you walk on." The words thundered through the room. Some guests gasped. Others lowered their eyes, ashamed. Emily turned away, unable to meet my gaze, and Ryan looked like a cracked statue, trying to stay upright while everything around him collapsed. For a moment I just stood still, watching the effect of my words. The weight wasn't in the volume of my voice, but in the undeniable truth they carried. The truth everyone could now see for themselves, etched in every document, every gesture. Ryan had always tried to erase my story, but now he was forced to face it, and not just him. Everyone in that room would never forget who had truly built that empire. My granddaughter ran to me, wrapping her arms around me, not fully understanding what had happened. I held her small hand and thought, may she never forget this night. May she learn that real strength isn't in what shines on the outside, but in what stands tall, even when others try to tear it down. And in that moment I knew this fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was the legacy I would leave for her. The impact of my words didn't fade quickly. It lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. No one dared break the silence. The guests, who just minutes before had been laughing and toasting, now avoided even moving their silverware. Ryan was still standing, but smaller. His eyes scanned the faces of the crowd, searching for support. He found none. Every look was a silent accusation. The same people who once cheered him now pulled away, realizing the pedestal beneath him had always been hollow. Emily tried to step in. "Everyone, let's not exaggerate. Michael is just a little emotional," but her voice trembled. And when she looked at me, she didn't find a broken man. She found someone standing tall, firm, holding in his hands the proof of everything they had tried to erase. Some investors whispered among themselves, pointing at the documents I had laid out. One even asked quietly if Ryan really had autonomy over his business. I didn't need to answer. His silence said it all. And that was what cut him most. Not just being challenged, but being unmasked before the very audience he most wanted to impress. His image as a self-made man shattered right there, in front of everyone. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to humiliate him beyond what was necessary. The truth was enough, and the truth did the rest. Ryan sank into his chair, drained. Emily avoided everyone's eyes, busying herself with napkins, as if that could disguise the collapse. The dinner lost its sparkle. That once glittering display now felt cold, empty, almost pathetic. In that moment, I realized the consequences weren't just social. It wasn't just about a humiliated son or a silenced daughter-in-law. It was deeper. It was the redistribution of respect. The same eyes that once ignored me now sought me out. The same people who saw me as outdated now recognized me as the root that had never stopped existing. I didn't ask for recognition. It came on its own, natural, undeniable. Ryan never spoke to me again that night. He left early, his face stiff, his steps hurried. Emily followed, her heels striking the marble floor like hollow hammers, and I stayed, surrounded by guests who came up to me, shook my hand and said things like, "Now I understand who really built this story. You deserve more respect than all of us have ever given you." I only smiled, not out of vanity, but because I knew accountability had been delivered. I didn't need to punish anyone. They punished themselves with their own arrogance. That night I walked out with my head high, not as a man seeking revenge, but as someone who, after years of being erased, finally reclaimed the space that was his by right. And the lesson was clear. Those who plant contempt one day reap shame. That night I returned home a different man. The cold wind brushed my face as I got out of the car, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. The folder of documents was still in my hands, but the weight I carried had been left behind. Not the weight of paper, but the weight of humiliation. I walked slowly through my house, glancing at the old photos on the walls, memories of completed projects, of hard days, of silent victories, and I understood. My life never needed applause, but it did deserve respect. Ryan and Emily didn't change overnight, but after that night, they thought twice before treating me as invisible. Not because I shouted louder, but because I had shown with proof that the foundation of everything they flaunted was still under my hands, and within me, peace returned. The dignity they had tried to strip away was back, and with it, the pride of never having abandoned my own story. Today, when I look back on everything I've lived through, I leave you with one lesson. Strength isn't about shouting the loudest. Strength is enduring in silence, preparing yourself, and turning the tables at the right moment. If you've made it this far, I want to tell you something. Never let anyone erase your story. Never allow someone to define your worth by the shine of what you own, but by the roots you've built. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been called weak? Have they ever tried to put you down? Treat you like you were invisible? Share it in the comments, because your voice matters. And don't forget to subscribe. Every time you take part, we prove that dignity can't be bought. It's earned.